in a policy governance board always refer to the policy that they're related to. In other words, in discussion of policy 2.7, this decision was made in relation. In other words, so they're just an extension of the policy. So, in essence, this is the voice of the board. To come to a board meeting without the policy manuals, like an opera singer showing up with laryngitis. You just can't do your job unless you have it memorized. And when it comes down to it, if you read through the policy manual, it's really not that long. I mean, some of the pages only have a couple of sentences on them. It's not very long. Yeah. One thought here about the policy manual is that I heard Dr. Carver say the board's job is a talking job. I started laughing when I heard that because, that's my default is to laugh. But I noticed nobody else in the room was laughing, and neither was he. So I was the board's job is a talking job. And I was thinking, yeah, that sounds real important. It's a talking job. Then I started running that through a biblical worldview and thought, now what tool did God use to create the world? He spoke, and the world came into existence, and he saw that it was good. And you go through all of that, and then in the same passage it says that he created man in his own image. We're created in the image of God, and God speaks, and good things happen. I'd like to think that that's still part of God's design, that we as his servants and as his children can use talking to create a better world for his glory. So I'm just trying to give you that overall context there. When you come to a board meeting, you're yapping at each other and you're talking, but it's not just talking. This is creating a better world for his glory. Okay, so does that make sense to you? Okay, so
especially in the context of what Hank said earlier about how this is in the world of Presbyterianism. This is a forum for the Holy Spirit to guide us.
Yeah,
and that's how we do it, is by talking.
Yep. So I'll go ahead and stick a little promo in here for board member attendance. That if you're, I would do everything you could in the future to shoot toward 100% attendance of board at meetings. Now I realize, I'm not stupid. I realize that sometimes things come up and you can't avoid an absence from here to there. But for the most part, 100%. Because you can't be a good board member if you're not there. And by the way, if you do show up and you don't say anything in the whole board meeting, what good are you? If your job is a talking job. Okay. Oh man, that didn't come out quite right. So not only presence but participation, okay? Because the board's job is a talking job. So, all right, I think I'll move on before I get my foot in my mouth there, further. Okay, then that third principle, board decisions should predominantly be stated in the form of policies. Let me go back to this diagram here. If you look at the board policy manual, there are 4 sections. There are ends, there are limitations, there's board management linkage, and governance process. There's the 4 categories of your policy manual. This is what good are we here to do for whom at what relative worth. These are the boundaries for the CEO. Then there's this sort of unseen dotted line right here, and everything above that is the role of the board. Now, how does the board delegate authority and responsibility to the CEO? How does it follow up? How does it monitor that? And then this one is governance process. How does the board do its job? So in essence, the board says, all right, CEO, we trust you to reach the ends and stay within the limits. And while you do that, you can trust us to do what we said here. I sat with a CEO in Arizona one time in an outdoor restaurant with tears streaming down his face as he told me about the fact he was going to resign from his CEO role. He said, I just wish the board was half as concerned, just half as concerned about how it did its job as it was about how I did mine. Yeah, he just lost total trust in that relationship with the board because they're always hacking at him about how he's doing his, but they didn't abide by the commitments that they made up here. So this is the way I tend to say this now in my South Carolina way is that if you're doing a good job with governance, it'll have 2 suspender straps. And one suspender of good governance is, yep, we got a competent CEO and we're going to let him do his job. Okay? And that other suspender strap is, yep, and we know our job and we're going to do it also. Okay? So, and the 2 different jobs, takes both straps to make this thing work on that suspender strap for good governance. But there's policies. After all, this is policy governance, so expect the policies to be really important. Let me give you another policy governance in pictures diagram here. I'll probably refer to this again. By the way, if you haven't already memorized this, you need to memorize this diagram. That'll help you. That'll help you get into heaven. You know when to ignore me, don't you? Okay. Oh my. That conversation went down quick, didn't it? All right. So here's your policy manual, which of course you already knew, and the policies go in different depths. So these are policies, and like in this chart down here, I call this the river diagram. But what river has straight banks? Well, unless you call the Panama Canal a river. I mean, they're wide in some places, they're more narrow in other places. And that's exactly how your policy manual is. There's some places where you're going to give the CEO wide latitude of choice to make decisions and do his job. Others, you're going to narrow it in some. And that's fine. That's your job. You define those boundaries. Same here. Throughout the entire organization, you'll do that. So there's ends policies, there's management limitations, there's board management linkage, and then there's governance process. Now, here's something that...
Bill, could you say those one more time? I don't think it's going to come out of the tape because of the guy outside the door there.
Okay.
Just the different 4 sections.
The 4 sections of your policy manual are the ends, the management limit, the ends, the limits, the board management linkage, how the board and the CEO link together, and then the governance process. And over on this side, you look to the CEO, Chief Executive Officer, and you actually say to them, your job is to reach the ends and stay within the limits. In fact, the way you evaluate the CEO is based on to what degree were the ends reached and the limits upheld. Okay? If this is his job, by the way, do you understand that if somebody asked you for a copy of the job description of the CEO for MBF, what would you give them?
The manual 1 and 2.
First 2 sections of the policy manual. Now, if they asked you for a job of the board at MBF, what would you give them?
3 and 4.
Over here, and in this case, it's the CGO, Chief Governance Officer. Over here, the CEO can use any reasonable interpretation of what the board said to reach the ends and stay within the limits. Over here, there's a great deal of latitude of choice on the part of the chair, the Chief Governance Officer, to use any reasonable interpretation of what the board has said to see that these, the policies here and there are upheld. These are both really important roles. In fact, I tell folks that the highest risk points in any organization will be whenever you change the CEO and whenever you change the CGO, okay, because you have a significant risk. One of the things I particularly like about MBF is how I think you take this seriously in the fact that you, do I have this correctly, that a chair-elect is in that role for 2 years, then they're in a chair for 2 years, and then they are the past chair role. So you have that continuity. In other words, that is a recognition of the significance of this role. I have one of the best boards I ever knew using policy governance went down the tubes in 2 to 3 months after they elected a chair that should never have been in that role. So, in fact, the organization almost went defunct after that. It was just changing one person. Okay, so very significant things. Okay, so this is how there's a lot of choice given to the leaders of the organization here within the definition the board is comfortable with, which is called your policy manual. Okay, so you give Hank a lot of latitude, you give Andy a lot of latitude, but you don't give them any more latitude than you want to based on what you've said in policy. Okay, all right. I eat fast, but I don't talk fast. So I'm going to have to speed it up here. So 4, board should formulate policies from the outside in. Let me see, we're almost 1 o'clock. What's our schedule?
Until 2:30.
2:30. Okay. I said we were going to do policy governance by picture, so we'll keep up that theme here. You develop policies from the outside in. That, at first blush, doesn't make a lot of sense unless you can visualize it. This is a well, in your mind, picture a Russian nesting doll, okay, where there's a bunch of dolls in there, but you pick it up by the biggest doll, take it off, and there's a smaller doll inside there. Take that off, a smaller doll inside. So there are all sorts of levels of policies there, but you always pick it up by that biggest policy. That's the concept here. And this is what I'm going to call the swimming pool principle. There's a shallow end, there's a deep end. And those of you who have seen this before, please don't answer this question, let the new ones answer this. But the shallow end of the pool, this is the pool of policy making. Okay, at the shallow end, these are the lower level issues, what some might call the micromanagement kind of issues, small operational kind of things. Whereas the deep end are big things that determine who we are as an organization. The emphasis on the local control. That was a big issue that you all have, and whether you have hospitals instead of Starbucks, it's a big issue. You're there. So shallow end, deep end. My question is, where do board members typically enter the pool of policy making? Well, yeah, a lot of times in the shallow end or over here in the hot tub. Okay. So there's the hot tub.
Well, that's where the CEO
Yeah. Oh my. So these, I'm sure you could tell this already, but these are board members. They're bright and shining stars. Okay. These are board members. One way to answer that question of policy making is wherever they're pushed. Because in their mind or in the mind of a few of their friends, an issue comes up and they say, "Hey, you're still on the board over there at MBF, aren't you?" And then, they're pushing you in the pool at that point to deal with an issue that is important to them. Oftentimes it's up here, not always, but here's the concept on this. Whenever you're being pushed into the pool by your own devices or by others, you take that issue and you take it down to the deep end of the pool and enter the pool there. In other words, you start with the biggest doll first on there and you deal with that issue first before you go any further. Because your job in writing policy and dealing with policy is to say all you must, not all you can. Okay? Say all, and if you don't do this, feel free to stand up twice a meeting, put robes on with hoods and march around the rooms. Say all we must, not all we can. Say all we must, not all we can. You can even jive with it a little bit if you want, but anyway, that's, yeah. So that is the concept here. I'll give you an illustration in a school setting, which I would be more familiar with. I went to help a board one time, and the chair said, "Phil, we need a policy on textbook selection." I said, "Okay, what's the issue?" And he said, "The textbook selection." I said, "Well, I heard those two words, but what's the issue?" And then he finally realized I was pulling one of those Socratic things on him, and he didn't like that. And he said, "No, I just don't know that our teachers are teaching from a biblical worldview perspective." I said, "So that's the issue?" He said, "Yeah, that's what I said." But I saw the other board members start to nod their heads, and that's what they really care about. So, long story short, they ended up writing a policy that the CEO, this was a limitation policy, CEO could not hire any instructional staff unless they gave evidence of a biblical worldview and an ability to teach therefrom. Okay, that was the limitation. Now, guess what policy they never wrote? They didn't need it. What they really cared about was that big doll. Can our teachers teach from a biblical worldview perspective? So they could have jumped right into the shallow end of the pool, had the best textbook selection policy that side of the Mississippi, but what would have been left unsaid? The thing they really cared about the most, and the thing that would keep their Christian school on track for years to come. So it's very easy to just throw dolls all over the place and grab this little one, hey, cute little doll, and write that policy, and you'll get this big policy manual filled with all these little dolls in there that you like to play with. We need to suck that back down. Keep your policy manual very concise. Say all you must, not all you can, and let that be your guide. So in that case, they wrote their policy. They put a a rope across the pool, said, here's our policy. Everything else up here, CEO, is free swimming. In other words, use any reasonable interpretation of what we've said to get the job done. You can use your style as you see fit. That is a very uncomfortable option for some board members, because some board members will sort of peek their snout underneath that rope and look up there. How's he doing that? You know, oh, I think I'll swim over there. Well, he's not doing that the way I would. You know, and they'll start chewing on the leg of the CEO, saying, I wouldn't have done it that way if I was you. And then by that time, there's blood in the water, and you know what happens, and the other sharks start swimming over. And so the CEO ought to be able to operate in this end of the pool without having to listen for the music. And by that I mean, da-dun, da-dun, da, the Jaws, music that comes at that point. Okay, give them the freedom to use their style, their mode of operation, what they're comfortable with, as long as they're staying within the boundaries, to get the job done, whether you would have done it that way or not. Okay. All right. Whoa. Board should define and delegate rather than react and ratify. Clarify the roles up front. This is the, I had yesterday some board representatives, called me and said, we need to find a new CEO for our organization. So what's our first step? The first step is decide how you're going to govern, because that will determine the kind of CEO you get. Okay, so you have to say, what's the board's job? What's the staff's job? CEOs are getting more savvy out there. I know a lot of folks that are in head positions. They won't even consider going to an organization unless they've committed to using policy governance, because it's the system out there that clarifies those roles. Because life's too short to get caught up in a bunch of political mishmash where people don't know what their roles are. So and I had a couple of days ago, a board said, well, Phil, what about fundraising? Whose job is that? Is fundraising a job of the staff or the job of the board? How would you answer it, or how do you think I answered it?
It's the job of the staff who can call upon the board for assistance.
Is that your understanding of how it works here?
Well, if the board gave 100% of what was needed, then
Depends on how the board writes the policy.
That is not an area where you want it to be muddy or unclear. Because like they say, if there's a fog in the pulpit, there'll be a mist in the pew. Okay, so you want to be here. Sorry.
Adam Robinson said that.
Is that who it was? Okay, I wasn't sure.
Just looked it up.
You already knew what was coming, huh? You've heard these things so many times.
That conversation was last week, and I had to go look it up.
Okay. So when it comes to fundraising, policy governance is not going to tell you whose job that is. It's your job to use policy governance to provide clarity there on that. But the thing is, if you, and this is pretty cool, the board can keep for itself anything that it wants. I mean, You get to define your job. There are 3 non-negotiables that you can't give away. You can't delegate. One is that your responsibility to link with the ownership, because you're the ones in the position to do that. The second thing is you're the ones that have to write the well-crafted governing policies for the organization. And the third non-negotiable is that you're the ones that people are trusting to make sure that the CEO reaches the ends and stays within the limits. Okay, you can't give those away, sorry. They're yours. But you can add to that list anything you want. If you want to do fundraising or part of the fundraising, you can make that your responsibility. But if it's something that's a sole responsibility of the board, then you can't hold him accountable for it. Okay? Actually, what most policy governance boards do is very close to what Dale said. They said this fundraising is the responsibility of the CEO to do it. But when they give the profile of a board member, it's somebody that is willing to participate in a volunteer capacity with raising of funds, or they might even, like some boards do, say that board members have to give X amount, per year. So you just define it, and your role. And let's just face the facts. Some people on boards are good at fundraising. Some people on boards, how would you say it? Not so good. Okay. But that doesn't mean they can't be a good governor because they're not a fundraiser par excellence. I was asked to be on a board one time. And the point of this statement is just be clear up front what the expectations are when you put board members there. So I was about to say yes to being on an international board, and then I found out that all the things that would cost me physically or financially cost me to be on that board, and the expectations that went with that, were not only donating but also travel expenses and everything. And I've been in Christian ministry for 40 years. I didn't have that kind of money. I couldn't afford to be on that board. But I was finally glad that I was glad I finally asked what it would cost to be on that board, so I'd know the expectations of that. Just so tell people up front. So whether it be, and when it comes to fundraising, you don't want to mess up when it comes to money. Let people know what the expectations are from your board perspective, and if part of what they're to do is to either raise money or give the CEO names of people you know that are loaded, then, well, I didn't say that. People of influence.